This is a developing story that has sent shockwaves through the highest levels of international diplomacy, fundamentally altering the conversation around Arctic security and global alliances. We are tracking a breaking situation involving the United States and one of its oldest, most strategic allies in Europe. Reports have surfaced and have subsequently been confirmed by official statements regarding the United States' serious expression of interest in purchasing Greenland, the world's largest island and a semi-autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. What initially appeared to some as a speculative headline has rapidly evolved into a significant geopolitical event, triggering immediate responses from world leaders, defense analysts, and officials across the Arctic region. This is not a hypothetical scenario or a rumor from the fringe. This is a confirmed diplomatic flashpoint that has placed the strategic future of the Arctic Circle at the forefront of the global stage. Moments ago, reactions began pouring in from Copenhagen and Nuuk, setting the stage for what could be one of the most complex diplomatic dialogues of the decade. The sheer scale of this proposition cannot be overstated. We are talking about a territory 3 times the size of Texas, holding pivotal strategic value for NATO, Russia, and China. As the United States looks north, the implications of this interest go far beyond a real estate transaction. They touch upon national security, resource dominance, and the delicate balance of power in the Northern Hemisphere. As we parse through the incoming statements, it is crucial to understand the gravity of the situation. This interest from the White House has reportedly led to high-level discussions regarding the feasibility, legalities, and strategic advantages of such a move. While no formal treaty has been signed and no land has changed hands, the mere existence of this conversation has rattled the diplomatic status quo. We are seeing immediate pushback from Danish officials, while experts in Washington are scrambling to analyze the long-term intent behind this maneuver. Is this a negotiation tactic, a serious expansionist goal, or a signal to rival powers that the United States is reclaiming its dominance in the Arctic? To understand why this story is dominating the news cycle right now, we have to look beyond the sensationalism of the headline and look at the hard geopolitical reality. This is breaking news, but it is rooted in a century of history and a future defined by a race for resources. As we go to air, the situation remains fluid, with diplomatic channels buzzing and the international community waiting to see how the Kingdom of Denmark will navigate this unprecedented overture from its most powerful ally. The question being asked in situation rooms around the world right now is simple, yet profound. What does the United States know about the future of the Arctic that necessitates such a bold, controversial move? The story begins with a series of reports indicating that the President of the United States had repeatedly discussed with advisors the possibility of the U.S. acquiring Greenland. These were not offhand comments made in jest, but rather inquiries that led to the White House counsel's office reportedly looking into the matter. When the news broke, it was met with a mixture of disbelief and intense curiosity. However, the skepticism quickly turned to serious analysis when the president publicly confirmed his interest, categorizing the potential purchase as a large real estate deal and noting that it would be strategically nice for the United States. He drew a parallel to the United States' acquisition of Louisiana and Alaska, framing it as a logical, albeit massive, extension of American strategic interests. The reaction from the Kingdom of Denmark was immediate and unequivocal. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, visiting Greenland at the time the news began to circulate, responded with firm rejection. She described the discussion as absurd, stating clearly that Greenland is not Danish property to be sold, but rather belongs to the people of Greenland. Greenland is not for sale. Greenland may not be Danish. Greenland is Greenlandic. I persistently hope that this is not something that is seriously meant, she told reporters. The sharp rebuttal highlighted the complex constitutional relationship between Denmark and Greenland, a relationship defined by the 2009 Self-Government Act, which grants Greenland extensive autonomy while Denmark retains control over foreign policy and defense. From Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, the sentiment was equally strong but nuanced with a distinct message of sovereignty. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Greenland issued a statement that resonated across social media and diplomatic cables alike. We are open for business, but we are not for sale. This phrase encapsulates the modern Greenlandic position perfectly. They are seeking foreign investment, they are seeking economic independence to eventually sever ties with Danish subsidies, but they view themselves as a people with a right to self-determination, not as a strategic asset to be traded between colonial powers. The idea that an island inhabited by 56,000 people could be bought in the 21st century struck a nerve regarding post-colonial identity and indigenous rights. Following the Danish Prime Minister's rejection of the idea, the diplomatic tension escalated. The President of the United States announced the postponement of a scheduled state visit to Denmark, explicitly citing the Prime Minister's unwillingness to discuss the purchase of Greenland as the reason. This move stunned diplomatic observers. State visits are usually planned months in advance and are symbolic pillars of international relations. To cancel one over a rejected real estate proposal signaled to the world that the U.S. interest in Greenland was not a passing whim, but a priority high enough to disrupt relations with a key NATO ally. It laid bare the transactional nature of the current U.S. foreign policy approach, where strategic acquisition takes precedence over diplomatic protocol. But why Greenland? And why now? To answer these questions, we must peel back the layers of this story and enter the high-stakes world of Arctic geopolitics. If you look at a map, Greenland sits directly between North America and Europe, and more importantly, between the United States and Russia over the North Pole. It is the gatekeeper of the North Atlantic. For decades, it has been viewed as an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the United States. The cornerstone of this strategic value is the Thule Air Base, the United States' northernmost military installation. Located 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle, Thule is critical for missile warning, space surveillance, and satellite control. It is the eyes and ears of the U.S. military looking over the pole, providing the earliest possible warning of a ballistic missile attack. However, the renewed interest goes beyond just missile defense. We are currently witnessing what experts call the Arctic gold rush. As climate change accelerates, the Arctic ice sheet is melting at an alarming rate. While this is an environmental catastrophe, from a cold, hard geopolitical perspective, it presents an economic opportunity. The melting ice is opening up new shipping lanes, the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route, that could drastically cut shipping times between Asia, Europe, and North America. Whoever controls the coastlines and the ports along these routes will hold the keys to the future of global trade. Greenland, with its vast coastline and deep water fjords, is positioned to be a logistical hub for this new maritime reality. Furthermore, beneath Greenland's melting ice lies a treasure trove of natural resources. Geologists believe the island holds some of the world's largest undeveloped deposits of rare earth minerals: neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. These are not just rocks, they are the essential ingredients for modern technology. They are used in everything from iPhone batteries and wind turbines to F-35 fighter jets and guidance systems for missiles. Currently, China dominates the global supply chain for rare earth minerals, controlling over 70% of production. This monopoly is viewed by Washington as a significant national security vulnerability. If the United States could secure access to Greenland's deposits, it would break China's stranglehold on these critical materials, securing the supply chain for American tech and defense industries for the next century. This context is vital because it explains that the purchase idea, while diplomatically unorthodox, addresses real American anxieties. China has already declared itself a near-Arctic state and has released a Polar Silk Road strategy. Beijing has been aggressively courting Greenland, sending delegations to Nuuk, proposing to build airports and investing in mining operations. For the United States, seeing a strategic rival like China establish a foothold in North America's backyard, essentially on the North American tectonic plate, is a red line. The purchase offer, therefore, can be interpreted as a clumsy but desperate signal that the U.S. recognizes it has neglected the region and is now scrambling to reassert its influence before rivals dig in. It is also important to note that this is not the first time the United States has tried to buy Greenland. History provides a fascinating precedent that legitimizes the strategic logic, if not the method. In 1867, the same year the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia, the State Department commissioned a report on the value of Greenland. Decades later, in 1946, President Harry S. Truman secretly offered Denmark $100 million in gold bars for the island. Truman, fresh off the victory of World War II, recognized that in the nuclear age, the polar route was the shortest path for bombers between the Soviet Union and America. Denmark refused then, just as they have refused now, but the strategic calculus remains unchanged. The geography hasn't moved, but the technology and the rivals have evolved. While the diplomatic spat over the purchase offer eventually cooled, with the U.S. and Denmark smoothing over relations, the incident catalyzed a shift in policy. The United States realized it could not buy the island, so it decided to woo it. In a move that went largely under the radar compared to the purchase headlines, the U.S. State Department announced plans to open a consulate in Nuuk for the first time in decades. This was a significant diplomatic maneuver, establishing a direct line of communication with the Greenlandic government, bypassing Copenhagen to some extent. Along with the consulate, the U.S. announced a $12.1 million aid package to Greenland for civilian projects. While the amount was relatively small, the symbolism was massive. It marked a pivot toward treating Greenland not just as a Danish territory, but as an emerging geopolitical entity in its own right. The reaction from the Greenlandic people has been a mixture of amusement, offense, and cautious pragmatism. For the Inuit population, who make up the vast majority of the island, the idea of being bought evokes painful memories of colonialism. They are proud of their culture, their language, and their growing autonomy. However, the economic reality is harsh. Greenland relies on an annual block grant from Denmark of roughly $600 million, which covers about half of the government's budget. To achieve full independence, a goal shared by many Greenlandic politicians, they need to replace that revenue. This is where the U.S. interest becomes complicated. If the U.S. invests heavily in mining and infrastructure, it could provide the economic engine Greenland needs to break free from Denmark. But would they simply be trading one colonial master for another? The conversation has also forced the European Union and NATO to wake up. For years, the Arctic was considered a zone of low tension, an area of exceptionalism where Russia and the West cooperated on search and rescue and environmental science. That era is effectively over. Russia has revitalized its northern fleet, reopening Soviet-era bases and deploying hypersonic missiles in the Arctic. They have planted a flag on the seabed at the North Pole. With the U.S. now making aggressive overtures toward Greenland, the Arctic has been militarized in rhetoric, if not yet fully in practice. The Greenland Purchase story serves as a bellwether for this shift. It signaled that the gloves are off and that the polite diplomatic fiction of the Arctic as a pristine nature preserve is being replaced by cold, hard realpolitik. What makes this situation even more intricate is the internal politics of the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark is a small nation with a massive geopolitical footprint solely because of Greenland. Without Greenland, Denmark is a minor northern European state. With Greenland, it is an Arctic power with a seat at the table with the US, Russia, and China. The purchase offer threatened to strip Denmark of its most significant strategic asset. The swift rejection by Mette Frederiksen was not just about national pride, it was about national relevance. Copenhagen knows that it must maintain the loyalty of the Greenlandic people to keep the kingdom intact. This means Denmark must now work harder to invest in Greenland and respect its autonomy, lest the Greenlanders decide that Washington, or perhaps Beijing, offers a better deal. As we analyze the fallout, we must look at the legal hurdles that made the proposal absurd in the eyes of legal scholars. The 1953 Danish Constitution incorporated Greenland as an integral part of the realm. The 2009 Self-Government Act recognized the Greenlandic people as a distinct people under international law. Therefore, Denmark literally cannot sell Greenland because it does not own the people or the land in a feudal sense. Sovereignty resides with the populace. Any change in status would require a referendum in Greenland and approval from the Danish parliament. The U.S. approach, treating it as a real estate transaction similar to the 19th century purchase of the Virgin Islands, ignored the last 70 years of evolution in international law and human rights. Yet, despite the legal impossibilities and the diplomatic awkwardness, the underlying issue remains unresolved. The United States has identified a critical vulnerability in its northern defense and supply chain. The purchase headline was the thunderclap, but the rain is just beginning to fall. We are likely to see increased U.S. military presence in the North Atlantic, more frequent submarine patrols, and perhaps renewed pressure to expand the capabilities of Thule Air Base. The conversation has shifted from can we buy it to how do we secure it. This is a subtle but vital distinction. The U.S. is now engaged in a soft power offensive, trying to win the hearts and minds of the Greenlandic people through education exchanges, investment, and diplomatic presence. The story of Trump's Greenland plan is also a story about the changing nature of alliances. For decades, European allies assumed the U.S. security umbrella was guaranteed and static. This event proved that the U.S. is reevaluating the cost-benefit analysis of its relationships. By attempting to deal directly for the territory, bypassing the traditional diplomatic niceties of the alliance with Denmark, the U.S. signaled a more unilateral approach. It forced Denmark, and by extension the European Union, to realize that they need to take their own defense of the Arctic seriously. They cannot simply rely on American passivity. The European Union has since begun to draft its own updated Arctic policies, realizing they were nearly sidelined in their own backyard. We also cannot ignore the environmental backdrop against which this geopolitical drama is playing out. The irony is palpable. The interest in Greenland is driven largely by the effects of climate change, melting ice exposing resources and routes. Yet the exploitation of those resources could further accelerate the environmental crisis. The Greenlandic government finds itself in a paradox. They are on the front lines of climate change, watching their glaciers disappear. Yet their path to economic independence relies on oil, gas, and mining, industries that contribute to that very warming. The U.S. interest is heavily focused on these extractive industries. Thus, the Greenland Plan is not just about flags and borders. It is about the ethical dilemma of development versus preservation in one of the world Espea's most fragile ecosystems. As we move deeper into this analysis, we must consider the perspective of the everyday Greenlander. In Nuuk, the capital, construction cranes dot the skyline. New airports are being built to encourage tourism. There is a vibrancy and a sense of nation-building. When the world's superpower points a finger and says, "I want that," it validates the feeling that Greenland matters. It boosts the confidence of local leaders to negotiate harder deals with multinational mining companies. It forces Denmark to treat them with more respect. In a strange way, the purchase offer, while rejected, strengthened Greenland's hand. It put them on the map in a way that years of diplomacy never could. It made the world realize that this icy island is a hot commodity. This brings us to the broader implications for the global order. If the Arctic is the new Mediterranean, a central ocean basin connecting powerful civilizations, then Greenland is its Sicily or its Gibraltar. It is the command center. Control of the Arctic means control of the connection between the Atlantic and the Pacific. With Russia fortifying its northern coast and China building icebreakers at a record pace, the United States fears being left behind. The Greenland Plan was a clumsy manifestation of a very real strategic anxiety, the fear that the 21st century will be decided in the cold waters of the North, and America is currently playing catch-up. But what happens next? The diplomatic dust is settled, but the machinery set in motion continues to turn. The U.S. consulate in Nuuk is active. High-level delegations are becoming frequent. The conversation has moved from the White House press briefing room to the quiet meeting rooms of the State Department and the Pentagon. The strategy has shifted from acquisition to integration, integrating Greenland into the North American security architecture so tightly that ownership becomes irrelevant. The goal is to make Greenland so economically and militarily dependent on the United States that it functions as a de facto extension of American power, regardless of what flag flies over Nuuk. This strategy, however, faces hurdles. The Greenlandic government is wary of replacing Danish oversight with American dominance. They are fiercely protective of their environment and their way of life. Any American involvement will be scrutinized heavily. Furthermore, China is not backing down. They are playing the long game, offering infrastructure projects without the heavy-handed military baggage that the U.S. brings. This sets up a classic tug-of-war. Will Greenland look east to Europe, west to America, or will it try to balance all sides to forge its own path? The purchase offer forced this question into the open, demanding an answer sooner than anyone expected. Ultimately, the story of Trump's desire to buy Greenland is a defining moment in modern geopolitics because it shattered the illusion of stability in the Arctic. It stripped away the polite diplomatic language and revealed the raw competition for power and resources underneath. It reminded the world that geography still dictates destiny. That is because, deep down, everyone understands the stakes. We are entering a new era of great power competition, where no territory is too remote and no alliance is too sacred to be reevaluated. The Greenland Plan was not an end. It was a beginning. It was the opening salvo in the battle for the Arctic. And as the ice melts and the superpowers converge, the world will continue to react, because the outcome of this struggle will shape the geopolitical reality for generations to come. This serves as a reminder that in international relations, the unthinkable can become the inevitable overnight. The initial shock of the proposal has faded, but the reality it exposed remains. Greenland is the strategic prize of the 21st century. The world is watching, the ice is melting, and the game has only just begun. The silence of the Arctic is being broken by the sound of history marching forward, and we must all pay attention to where it leads.